better? Is this microphone in the way now? Can you see it? If we move it over, would it make it better? So it's just not in the line of sight? Now, can you still hear me? Can you hear me now? Is that better? Do you think that mic that's on that I have plugged in on the camera is causing any problems? Should I just unplug it or?
Yeah, it's not doing anything.
Okay, well, I can make sure it doesn't do any interference. Okay. Does that work okay? Okay. How's that sound? Still working? Okay. The only thing is Dennis is gonna have to hold the mic up.
sure seems like a long way from the audience up here. I gotta admit.
You want-
These can be handed out.
Okay.
Well, the problem I was having with the program was my computer.
So this is your HDMI cable, right?
Yeah,
We'll run it over.
should work just fine. I don't know why they make a podium so damn called in.
You need to set it down?
Yeah, I think I would,
Okay.
actually. I think that's just ridiculous.
You're right. Yeah, that's what I'm talking about. Cutting it off.
Here, I'll help you. We'll just say, well,
Okay, what's the sign?
yeah.
Are too low now?
No, it's fine. It's fine.
Something about what not working for you, I
Lay
can
it out
tell.
like that. Oh, it's all right. I don't like having 25 feet between you and the audience. But that's okay.
We can get him, tell everybody to get, to move up.
Well, or I could move to them. We can move Muhammad to the mountain or the mountain to Muhammad, huh? Not to,
Well,
not
then
to,
you'll make
not
it
to,
so Chris can't do what he needs to.
Actually, if you came forward a little bit, I think it would be all right.
do you? Well, I think
Not,
I'd
not
prefer,
too far,
I'd,
probably 3 feet at the most.
well,
Um,
cause I don't know that we're gonna have such a huge group here.
what's that?
I say, I don't know that we're gonna have a big group. I'm guessing 20 to 30 people. Seems like a, good evening. How are you, Matt?
Good, how
Good to
about
see you.
You too.
that goes to the house, this goes to the computer. So, okay, so if you stand kind of facing this way, or maybe even
Like say this, okay? Okay.
So what are we doing?
he's gonna stand here, and we're gonna. So I move the microphone up. He's not following the plan.
Well,
What's his plan?
I just,
That's what we're trying to
I don't
figure
wanna
out.
be put up there. They,
Okay,
testing,
here, do this.
testing,
Turn this way.
why?
Because I want this. We're going live and I want people to know who we are. Is that okay? Or not? Here.
Yeah, that's fine. Testing,
Doug, you wanna mind the camera while I'm doing this?
Yeah, we do.
I'm just moving back a little bit so we can get a
Um,
better.
can you hear me?
Okay,
Yeah,
that's
hold on,
probably
Dennis.
I'm just, for those of you that are interested, I have a sheet here that talks about state citizenship versus federal citizenship. For those of you that have heard another lecture I may have given on state citizenship that's specific, this has several Supreme Court cases and federal court cases dealing with the distinction between federal and state citizenship. I'm putting them up here if you want to come and get one, or after the lecture. I'm not talking about it much, but it's one of the focal points of what I have to teach. There's another one here that I'll make available to you. This one is resources, so you can do some research on your own. I really encourage that. Coming to the lecture is like talking about going swimming without swimming. Okay? You go to a swimming class, you got to get in the water. So if you want to do some personal research on these topics, there are some resources on this sheet here. Again, I'll put it right here.
Okay, you about ready?
Yeah, I'm ready whenever you want to.
Okay, Chris, you ready? Where? I see somebody come in, I'll just put it in, would it be better if we moved this over here a little way?
Yeah, probably. Drag this over here.
Please bear with us, we're actually trying to figure out how to live stream, and this will be our first live stream, so hold on. Thank you. How's that? Any better or worse?
Oh, yeah, much better.
And Okay, this gives you right here to talk.
That's
and
fine.
To see, okay?
Perfect.
You ready? Thank you everyone for coming. Apologize for getting started off late. We're actually, like I said earlier, trying to figure out how to live stream. We'll get this figured out and be able to do this for all of our weekly meetings and everything. So, but we'll go ahead and get started. Dennis Harrell had offered to give our opening prayer.
Good evening, Lord. We just thank and praise you that we can call on your name anywhere and any place and you'll hear us. We thank you that you're here with us tonight. We ask that you would just bless our time together, that you would teach us from this lesson that we're going to have on the Constitution, and that you would enable us to apply it in our life and in our nation, that we might turn our nation towards you, that we would follow you and do things according to your will. And we thank you and praise you for your grace, for suffering and dying in our place and paying the total cost of our sin, Lord. We thank and praise you for just guiding us, this leadership of Stand Up for Idaho, and we thank you for them, and we just ask that you would just bless our time together tonight. Thank you. In Jesus' name, amen.
Thank you. Everybody please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. We have a few things that I want to cover. Several of you may have come last week. Ammon didn't make it, as you're aware, and so we have rescheduled with him. It's currently August 17th he will be here, so you can plan on that. He said that if he can make it, work it into his schedule, get here earlier, he'll try to work that in. He'll let us know. Some upcoming events. Next week, we're actually having Scott Cleveland. He's running for Senate, U.S. Senate against Crapo as an independent. So it would be interesting to come and listen to him because, it's going to be an interesting electoral season the next little while. Next week, the week after that, we did have a lady that was going to talk about child predators and stuff, but some things happened, and she had to, she requested that she postpone that for a little while, and we'll get back to that later. One thing that our Liberty Dinner is going to be July 7th, and Ron Nate has agreed to be our speaker. And as you know, Ron was one of the most conservative, most powerful legislators that we had in the House, and he lost his bid for re-election. So it's going to be very interesting to listen to what he says. I do know he has some other plans, other things in the works, but I'll let him tell you about that. So I would encourage us all to sign up for that Liberty Dinner. I think it's going to be a very, very informative dinner. So if you could, that would be very much appreciated. July 4th is just around the corner, and we actually have some spots in the parade. I actually have 3 positions in the parade, and we're going to have a float. And actually, Peggy Merkel here come and talked me into doing it, and she has just taken taken it on to help us get a float put together and all of that. So we're going to do that. I do need some help on that. We're planning on, we have a 16-foot trailer that's already, and the decorating and all that's been designed, and all the pieces and parts are being put together right now by Peggy and another lady. But it needs some help on the morning of the 27th and the day of the 27th and potentially 28th to help decorate that thing. And so if you would be willing to come and give us a hand, we'd really, really appreciate that. So need about 4 or 5 people to come and help us do that. A couple of guys to come do some carpentry work, and then, just help them put pretty stuff on the float, I guess. So if you would be willing to help us on that, that would be wonderful. We also need riders and walkers to walk on the parade. Stand Up for Idaho has come a long ways over the last year, and really, I think that a lot of people have heard of us, but we need to get our name out even more and get people to understand. I think that we've had a pretty good impact on people this last year, and so if we can make a good showing at the parade, I think it will be beneficial to us all. And on that note, I didn't bring one up right now, but we have some t-shirts that has the logo on it and on the back and everything. I have some from last year, a few ladies ones. They're really thin, and so if you want one, and they're fairly small, if you want one, they're just for $10. But I did order some new ones of heavier material and stuff, so they're not quite so transparent. And anyway, I'm going to have those the week before the 4th of July, and that's sort of a little fundraiser for Stand Up for Idaho, and so we'll be selling them for $15. And I want to get back on the Liberty Dinner. That's actually, Stand Up for Idaho, we don't charge, we don't have a membership, we don't do anything, and we basically have very few fundraisers. The only fundraiser that we constantly have is our Liberty Dinner. And so, I really encourage you, if you can, that does help us, do things like pay for the room and everything here throughout the month and all that. And of course, the jar we have up there is, for donations, and people are very generous with that, and I really appreciate that. But, unfortunately, things aren't free. And a lot of this stuff that Chris is doing, as I said earlier, we're trying to go live stream, figure out how to do that so that more people can see. It takes time and effort and equipment to do that. So your support in our Liberty Dinners and all that would be very, very much appreciated, and on the t-shirts and stuff. So also, and as you see when you came in, and Cindy's been working, and a lot of ladies have been working on really hard, and guys, excuse me. We're having a Constitution camp for kids. Will be July 25th through the 28th. Actually, through this whole area, we get the whole Shiloh Event Center to do that, so it'll be wonderful. But we do need a lot of help, still need some help on that, and so if you're willing to give a hand, if you have interest on, what kind of help is needed, I just have you ask Cindy, and she can tell you what you need to do. So we did get started a little late, so we're going to hurry on here, but Donna Howard has a few things that she'd like to mention to us, and an effort that she's trying to get started up. And Peggy, you want to say something too? Oh yeah, and she's right. And on the parade, I need 2 pickups in mind. Actually, a pickup that would pull the float. It's on a 16-foot trailer. It's pretty light and all that, so it doesn't need to. But we're looking for a pickup on that, and then maybe another pickup to bring up the rear, if you will. Last year, what we had for Stand Up for Idaho in the parade, we had, like I say, we had 3 spots. I have a little red Jeep, and then we had another, and the Jeep, I had the top off and flags on it, and went really well. I had another pickup that had flags in it, people in it, went really well, and it had a boom box in it. And then another pickup with flags, and I mean, it was actually very simple, but the crowd loved it, it looked like. This year, that center one is going to be the float that Peggy's working on, and so we're looking for a couple of pickups, one to be able to pull the float, and one to bring up the rear, if you will. And if anybody has a boom box or sorts that we could borrow for the parade, that would be wonderful. So, they got you covered? Good, thanks. I'm glad I have people keeping me straight. And so with that, I'm going to turn it over to Donna for just a few minutes and whatnot. She has something that an effort that she's trying to get going. All these type efforts are very important to to us all. And so Donna, come on up and I'll let you tell everybody what you're trying to do. Thank you.
I talked a little bit about it last week because Ammon wasn't here, so I'll make this really quick. I'm heading a group that is bringing awareness and transparency for the city of Idaho Falls in the mayor's office. I have a handbook. It's called How to Be an Activist Handbook. It's from Tom DeWeese. He does the American policy. He has a lot of articles on a lot of things. I did send an email out to him today because he does come to places and will speak and help with the activism. We started this back in April, but the turnout was really small, and then we had all the elections and everyone was doing door walking. So on what I have set up right now is I'm going to do it one time a month on a Tuesday. So the next meeting is going to be the 28th of June at Freddy's. He's letting us use the dining room. It'll be at 7 o'clock. I do have a sign-up sheet if you want to participate. There's a name and an email address, and then I will send out some email announcements over the weekend to remind you of this. If you want to bring people with you, that would be great. And let's just try to hold the city accountable. There's lots of things that are going on that I'm sure. It's Franklin's, sorry, it's Franklin's cheesesteak, you're right. I say that all the time, and I look it up, and I'm like, why can't I find it? It's Franklin's over by the museum. 7. And he would like us to actually purchase food, but he said we can use it even if we don't. So maybe think about getting French fries or a drink or something just to help him out, because he's very actively involved. And he also told me that we can use his facility to hang up flyers. He wants us, when we go to the meetings and we make our notes and we're gonna go public, he wants us to hang that information up in his business so that people coming in for lunch can read them and see them. So I'm just gonna put my clipboard right up here with his paperwork, and at the end of the meeting, you can write down your name and email address, and then I will keep you informed that way. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. You know, what she says is very important. You know, whether we like it or not, the truth is, and I've said it before, you know, we are actually at war right now, and we are under attack. Look at, you know, the gas prices, the things that are happening. She mentioned activism. We do all need to become active, and we actually need to work to fill up this whole room and this whole building, because you know what, if we don't, we're going to have our country is going to change in a very horrible way. And I'm not going to take up any more of Dennis's time, but so, like I say, if we can support Donna and her efforts, that would be great. Get your friends and neighbors and everybody to come to this meeting. We will meet every Wednesday regardless. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Dennis. Let's everybody give Dennis a big hand. He's been working this for several years. This is his third installment of, we don't know how many, but what he has is important to everybody, so go for it. Thank you.
Thanks, Doug. Thanks for being here, everybody. Obey all laws at all times, and do your own research to find out what that means. What is a law? We're going to talk about that some. Most of you, I know, have been to a previous lecture of mine or two. I want to introduce just a concept tonight before I get really into the topic. The topic tonight is on contracts. And you say, well, what does that have to do with the Constitution? And that's what we're going to talk about tonight. But I want to talk about a concept. Those of you that have attended other of my lectures, you've heard me talk about state citizenship a lot. And I told you I had handouts here. I apologize. I must have had a pile that the top few were those quotes from cases on state citizenship. So I apologize. Those are limited. But the sources on this other handout that talks about resources that you can look up on your own and study state citizenship, are very good. Now, everything that I've talked about in the past, I've made the assertion that state citizenship is where you find your constitutional protections. And I maintain that, and that's true. But there's another term that I ran into here a few months ago, and some of you in this room are already familiar with that. It's called a national, or American state national, which is very similar to a state citizen, okay? I'm not going to get into a big discussion on that tonight, other than this. In fact, I just sent off my renewal application for a passport today. And in my research on that, I came across a statement. It's actually out of the Code of Federal Regulations. What you have is you have the Constitution, then you have the statutes that are drafted by the legislature, which are there for the purpose of governing government, not you. So you've maybe heard me say that before. Statutes are about limiting and controlling government, not the people. So, anyway, under the statutes, there are the rules and regulations that are made in pursuance of the statute. And this is taken from CFR, Code of Federal Regulations 22, Section 51.2. Listen to this statement. It says, passports are issued to nationals only. A passport may be issued only to a U.S. national. Now, how many of you in this room have a passport or have had a passport? And on the application, did it ask you if you were a national? And I can assure you it did not. What it asked you, are you a U.S. citizen? But under the Code of Federal Regulations, it clarifies what it means by that, and it calls them a national. What a national is similar to a citizen. They are a person, an inhabitant, a person holding rights who lives upon the land within that jurisdiction. And here in Idaho, that would be within the borders of Idaho. I'm an Idaho national, an American state national, and when I go to the poll to vote, and I step through the door and they hand me the ballot, when I take that ballot in my hand, I am putting on the hat of a citizen. Because citizenship is a franchise, it's a privilege. Everything else I do, walking, working, holding property, all of the speaking, worshiping, anything I do, everything else I do as a national. So this is a new concept, and I know it's a new concept, so don't worry about getting onto it too fast. I'm just introducing it to you so you can cogitate on it for a bit. When you step into the voting poll and you vote, you are putting on a privilege. It's a political privilege, and it's a kind of a right because it helps to protect all of our other rights, right? And in that sense, it is a right, but it's defined by the state. It is the legislature who defines what a citizen is so that you can exercise certain political privileges, like serving on a jury. That's another one, okay? So I just wanted to introduce that thought to you tonight. I haven't talked about that national status before because all of the cases that I cited and that are on that handout that I mentioned are in reference to citizenship. But they operate often as the same status, okay? So I just wanted to introduce that concept, national, okay? There are some people in the room here who have filed to establish their status with the state being recognized as nationals rather than citizens, and I'm doing that myself, okay? In the past, I didn't make that distinction, but I am doing it myself now. And I did it today when I filed for the renewal of my passport. And it's because of that passport. Now, the passport is issued by whom? The Secretary of State of the United States. He is the records keeper for our country. And so when I filed my application today, I filed it with an affidavit, and that affidavit, I put the Secretary of State on notice of my, quote, national status.
Yeah,
When you get that, will you contact me and let me know if it's a different color
yeah.
compared to your old one?
You'll ask me in 30 days, or 45 days, or
I
something.
heard they're different colors, I would like to know.
Yeah, I don't know. We'll see. Okay, so, contracts with the state and with corporations usually come in the form of what's called an adhesion, like to adhere to something. To adhere, adhesion, it's an adhesion contract. And most of them come in a form, and the one that they gave to you is exactly like the one they gave to me. And the one they gave to you is exactly like the one they gave to me. When you've got a driver's license application, every one of those applications was a contract, and every one was exactly alike. Okay? So I'm talking about, and the same is true if you go to, if you sign up for Amazon, or if you sign up for T-Mobile or something, and you click on the window on the computer, that's consenting to a contract. Okay? You can do it in different ways. So, anyway, so when you get a birth certificate, and they walk in, and you've just delivered a baby, and the nurse hands you an application for a birth certificate, you've already been run over by a semi, and you're under duress because of all those biological things going on, and you've got a new baby, and maybe the baby is at risk for some reason, and they're saying, well, this baby needs vaccinations immediately. And then they walk over and they say, oh, and by the way, we need you to sign this birth certificate. It's creating a contract with the state. And there's more to it than that, but I'm going to keep it simple tonight. It's a contract, okay? So, driver's license. You get a driver's license at 14 and you sign on the dotted line, right? What do you know about law at 14 years of age? What do we know about law now? Most of us, not a whole lot, and that's what this is about. Let's fix that. Let's fix that problem. Oh, sorry, I want to finish reading through that. Social Security number. You go in, my first one, I worked moving pipe, and my employer, my boss, said, well, I need a Social Security number. Why? Because the accountant told him that I needed a Social Security number. Marriage license. Whoa, is that a contract? It is. It's a three-way contract. And so far as the state, I've got cases that I can show you. So far as the state is concerned, God is not part of that contract. W-4 form. Why does an employer need you to fill out and sign a W-4 form if it's the law? It's because it's not the law, it's a contract. 1099 is the same way. When you sign it, you're entering into a contract. You are giving them permission to take money out of your paycheck. Okay? Business license. Do you sign for it? Do you make application for it? You sure do. Professional licenses, doctors, lawyers, and what have you. Passport office. When you sign on that, now there's ways to do that. I signed for a passport today. I filled out an application, and I'll show you later on how you qualify your signature so that you reserve your rights against the adhesion contract. It's an adhesion contract. They're all the same. A contract, in order to be under the common law valid, needs to be negotiable. In other words, you have two parties, one on each side of this thing, of this relationship, and you both have a right to negotiate the terms of the contract. When you got that from the Idaho driver, DMV, there was no negotiation, right? Okay. Passport office, again, insurance is a contract. Mortgage on your home, that's a big one. Whoa, 30 years, contract. And when you sign on a check, every time you give your assent to something, you are either surrendering some kind of property, or you are qualifying your rights. You are diminishing your rights in many cases. And the other person signing may actually be giving you some rights. So in many cases, that contract is mutually beneficial to all of us, to the people involved. But when it's an adhesion contract, and there's the big state, and when I say the state, I mean the city or the state of Idaho or the federal government, when they're the big guy and they hold all the cards, it is not an equal exchange, and that matters. Okay? So, how much law did you learn in school? About that much. Now, I had to take one class in college, but other than that, zip. Okay? How many of you did any in high school? I saw somebody raise their hand once, and they were in advanced classes, accelerated classes, or pre-college or something like that, and they had to take a law class. I think that's great. Okay? How many of you had to take algebra? Raise your hand, please. Okay? Or some other class, and how much have you used algebra?
A lot.
I hear crickets. Now, some do, and some do, okay? Some do. But for most people, frankly, unless you're going into some advanced college class or something like that, and you don't use a lot of it. Now, I admit I do too, but most of the time I don't, okay? In fact, a couple times a year, I have to do a pro forma statement for a client or something like that. It isn't very much. But let me ask you, how many times in a day do you engage in some kind of contractual relationship with the state or somebody else? Okay? Oops, sorry. And the answer to that is, you sign a check, you use a credit card or a debit card, you went online and you logged into a new account, and all these things that I mentioned earlier, all those are contractual relationships. Now, let me tell you a quick story today. I was involved with a young man recently who made a mistake when he was 19 years old. He committed a crime, and he got caught, and I think there's probably a plea bargain involved in that. Is a plea bargain a contract? Absolutely. So anyways, they were prosecuting him. He made restitution to the people he hurt. And 5 years later, his probation is just about to terminate just here in the next... Soon. I was in court with that young man and watched the proceedings, and he was there and recognized that the court uses contracts to get jurisdiction over us. And he was challenging that jurisdiction, saying, well, I was defrauded into this contract. Now, I don't know where that's going to go exactly. I think he's going to win, because I've seen situations like this where jurisdiction was claimed and jurisdiction didn't exist. I've been involved in cases like that. That jurisdiction is created through your consent. And that includes in the courts. So, all right. So tonight we're going to talk about, you came here to hear about the Constitution. And the question is, what does a contract have to do with the Constitution? What is the Constitution? Just briefly. The Constitution's purpose was a compact between the 13 original states to give them a power to a common government that would help to protect them as a union. And what it is it's a set of chains that binds the government so that it doesn't attack the people, that it doesn't turn on the people. It's limited government. That's what the Constitution is about. What a contract is about is the government's off doing its job. You and I are going about our business earning a living, right? Which is our right to do that. And we have a right to make contracts with each other. And so long as we go about our business making contracts with each other and taking care of and honoring those contracts in each other, the government can just stay in its place and take care of itself. What happens, though, is the government comes along and says, you know, we want to get our fingers into your business. And so the government says, we're going to turn your right to travel into a privilege. And if it's a privilege and we give it to you, we have the right to control that privilege and we have the right to tax that privilege. That's what happens. The government condescends from its position of governing to a position of dealing in commerce with us, And that's what happens is we mistakenly enter into contract with the government. And that's what the problem is. And what we don't do is recognize that we are surrendering our rights in exchange for a privilege. And we do that by contract. Okay? So that's why this is so important. And so tonight we're going to talk about the elements of contract to help recognize when we are being defrauded into surrendering our rights. Okay? So, in my passport application that I mentioned earlier, I made an affidavit. An affidavit is a statement of fact asserting certain things that I have firsthand knowledge of. So, the Declaration of Independence was drafted or issued in July 4th, 1776. That other document underneath there is a copy of my personal Declaration of Independence. Now, today I will update that because some of the things I understood when I wrote that, which was a couple years ago, I've changed. And that's okay. Learning about the law is like learning about nuclear science. As you move along, you learn new things. And so I'm learning new things all the time. So when I filled out my passport application, I drafted a affidavit, and I signed it, and I had a notary witness my signature, and I had two other people sign as witnesses to it as well. The notary makes it so the recorder's office can record it, because by statute in Idaho, a document to be recorded at the recorder's office requires a notary seal. But for my common law purposes, now when I talk about the common law, what am I talking about? I'm talking about Bible law, that the golden rule, how I treat you and you treat me, that where your nose begins, my fist stops, and I honor your property, you honor my property. That's the common law. Under the common law, it said by the mouth of 2 or 3 witnesses, didn't it? It didn't say a notary public. So, what's the difference between notary public and 3 witnesses or 2 witnesses? Now, the notary public's signature, that works fine too. So I got 3 signatures there. Even though she was acting in the office of a notary, I have 3 signatures on that document. But, so I can get it into the recorder's office, but I want it to be under common law, so I have 3 signatures on it. That's a common law principle. Isn't that what God told you? 2 or 3 witnesses? Yeah. Okay? So, why do we have civil law and why do we have common law? The civil law is attempting to displace your common law rights. And it's been going on for 100 and, I don't know, at least 100 years and longer, okay? Just as we observe in politics, we're seeing the traditional Christian Judeo culture being displaced by sectarianism. Is it secularism? Secularism? Yeah, I think that's it. Secularism. Okay? Well, they've already done it with our courts. And this is how they did it, is they've written all these statutes, and they've told you that you have to comply with them. And all through school they said, sit down, shut up, and obey. And we're doing pretty good doing that now, aren't we? As a country. Am I wrong? No, I'm not wrong. Am I? We're doing a good job of continuing to sit down, stay in place, shut up, and obey. Okay? So, civil government is commercial government. It operates in commerce. And everything in civil government, and the real reason they have displaced 3 signatures with a notary is because it's simple. And there's no checks and balances as a result. So, anyways, I filed my affidavit with my passport and I qualified. I had to fill out their application like they require, right? But I attached to that and I qualified it with my signature, and I added an affidavit to it that said I'm a national, that I am not a citizen of the United States, meaning the corporate United States, and meaning the territorial United States, and meaning the municipal United States. Those are not the same thing as the constitutional United States of America. They are not the same thing. There's a corporate body, and then there's the American Republic. They are not the same. And state nationals and state citizens are the ones that are protected under the Bill of Rights and under the Idaho Constitution. Okay? So, am I independent of government guardianship? I watched the court when I was in that court hearing, and it was so obvious to see that the court views itself as this young man's protector, as his parent, as his guardian. And it's exactly the same way the state views every one of us, that it's there to protect you and guard and be your guardian, that you are a ward of the state. Or do I want to be free and independent? Okay? So, what is a contract? Basic contract principles, a few examples of contracts we enter into, how to challenge the validity of one of these bad adhesion contracts. Okay, we're going to talk about that a little bit tonight. And then objectives: protect your rights, stay out of jail, and stay out of court. If you do it right, that's the object, and that's where you should be. And still have your rights, be able to claim your rights. And finally, I'm going to talk about a few boilerplate clauses. Boilerplate means it's like a carburetor that you use in lots of different car engines. Clauses that they use in contracts, they have when they say, okay, this goes in all these different kinds of contracts. It's just a common fixed clause that that articulates a particular legal right, is what it does. So what is a contract? Basic principles. Okay, first of all, a contract is an agreement or a compact intentionally. That's a big deal. I just read a book by Oliver Wendell Holmes Jr., who served on the U.S. Supreme Court. He wrote a book called The Common Law. It's considered a classic in law. And in that, he talked about a lot of things about contracts, but the one thing he came back and he said again and again and again is that in order for a contract to be enforceable, in order for it to be valid, it must be entered into with intent. Intent is a little bit different than consent. Consent says, yeah, I agreed to do that, but intent means that in my mind, I knew what I was doing, and what I did was what I intended to do. Okay? Intent is a big deal. So, intentionally entered into between two or more parties to do or not to do a particular thing, and each acquires the right to what the other promises. Upon sufficient consideration, consideration is payment or something given in exchange, for the breach of which, in other words, if I don't do it, for the breach of which the law provides a legal remedy. Okay? That's what a contract is. It's an enforceable agreement between two people, two or more people. And that can be the government and me, but again, the government's pretty big, and I'm pretty intimidated by him, right? It, her, whatever you want to call it. I'm pretty intimidated by it. We're not on equal grounds, okay? That's a mix from two law dictionaries, Bouvier's, which is the law dictionary used to interpret the Constitution of the United States, and Black's Law that continues to be like the Bible to the legal trade. So, these are just some examples I mentioned briefly. Federal Constitution, Idaho Constitution. Boy, guys, we really undervalue the Idaho Constitution. I just tell you, the more I study this, the more convinced I am that if you want your rights, you've got to understand the Idaho Constitution. Okay? Now, if we have a public official, now, I've said something before that I need to correct. If we have a public official who violates our rights, whether it's the right to travel, the right to own property, the right to speak, all those, or the right to defend ourselves. If we have a public official that violates our right in some way, where did I tell you they are governed? How are they governed? Public officials. How did I tell you earlier? Do you remember? Help me loud. How? Statutes. Under the statutes. They aren't there for us to tell us how to conduct our lives. Very good. They're there to tell officials when they are engaged in their official capacity, it controls them. So if a federal official or a state official violates our rights, we can use the statutes against them. That's a big deal. We protect ourselves under the Constitution. We don't take retribution. We take action against public officials using the statutes. Okay? So lots of other things: marriage license, building permits, construction agreements, service agreements, all those things. Okay? And the Constitution is a trust, by the way. It's a trust. It's a trust that the 13 states are canonized in the Constitution to protect themselves from the government. It's a trust. And they gave land out, I believe it's out of Virginia, Washington, D.C., that was the 10-mile square that was granted to the federal government from the state of Virginia. Other than that, do you know that the federal government does not own land? You've heard of the Bureau of Land Management, right? It isn't owned by the federal government. It's maybe under the management of the federal government, but only because we have a legislature or a governor. I don't know the particulars of that, but only because our state officials have granted them management privilege to the federal government. That's how it got there. So, okay. Say what? Louder, please. Okay? Well, I did. It's a delegation. It's a delegation. Oh, it's a delegation of authority from the state to the federal, though. It doesn't go the other way around. When the federal government granted the land of Idaho to the Idaho people, that grant severed Congress's control of that because it had no more ownership in it. Only the state of Idaho, the people of Idaho, have a claim in that land, unless by contract we give it up. Okay, so. All right, driver's license, that's Lucille Ball, or a lookalike. When you get a car registration, why don't you have perfect title to your car? Because when it went through the dealership, they took the manufacturer's certificate of origin and sent it into the state. They surrendered it in your behalf because you thought they were doing the right thing. We can fix those. We can fix these things, I'm telling you. Okay? And marriage contracts and signing a check. So, the elements of a contract. Now, those of you that have the handout, if you want to look at that while we're talking here, you have two parties or more. And the first thing that's necessary, in my opinion, is intent. There has to be intent. We intend to come to an agreement between us. And we have to be on equal standing. So the big guy that's 300 pounds, and we've got this little guy over here, and he's 100 pounds, and this guy here says to him, "You're going to contract with me." And this guy feels duress, and he signs the contract. Is that a fair contract? Well, the answer is obvious. So, equal standing, they need to have capacity. Capacity means the mental capacity to recognize that there is a contract and that they're entering into the contract and that they're giving something up and they're receiving something in exchange and those things. So capacity also includes not being inebriated or somehow experiencing mental capacity. And by statute, a person has to be 18 years of age or older to have capacity to contract. Okay? So we have an offer and acceptance. This is called the meeting of the minds. And then we have an exchange. It's called consideration. I'm giving you something in exchange for you returning something to me of value. We're both exchanging something of value. And then for some things, we have what is called a statute of frauds. Any of you familiar with that term, statute of frauds? If you're going to sell real estate, it has to be in writing. And that's what a statute of frauds, that's part of the statute of frauds. That's why somebody can't just sell a piece of land saying verbally that I'm selling you a piece of land. Under the statute of frauds, you can't do that. It has to be in writing so that there's an evidence that can be recorded with the recorder's office. Can you do it on a napkin? Yeah. You can be sitting in a restaurant, pull out a napkin, and write it up on a napkin and use that as your document. It doesn't say anything more than it just has. Now, there may be some things in the code, I don't know. But technically, and I know under law, there have been cases where somebody sold a piece of land, they wrote it on a napkin, and the court enforced it and said, yep, that's a valid contract. It met, at least in that case, it met the requirement of the statute of frauds. So, and then your signature and your consent. So there's about 8 elements that are really important in a contract, okay? So, equal standing, capacity, being informed, consent, okay. 2 or more people, okay, we just kind of hammered that for a minute. Let's go on past that. All right. Now, just briefly again, they need to be on equal standing. That's important. They need to have they need to be competent. Now, why am I talking about this here right here? I mentioned earlier that we can correct errors that we've made in contracting with people that are bad contracts. And the way we do that is if some of these things that impair our capacity to contract were in place when we made the contract. So, any of these things that are listed here, and if we did it without our free will, if we entered into it without our free will, if we weren't on equal standing with the other party, if we lacked competency, lacked capacity, sane, sober, and of age, if we weren't fully informed of the knowledge of the terms, in other words, there was no fraud, and we consented by signature, and of course, if it has to be legal, okay, it has to be legal. Any of those things can make a contract void or voidable. So when did you get your Social Security number? Were you of legal age? Probably not. Okay. Well, in most of the places where we have contracted with government, do you feel like you were fully informed that what you were doing was creating a contract? And you could use the word, enslave yourself through some of those contracts. It might be slavery of some sort. Peonage is financial slavery. So, equal strength, yes or no, okay? This is in a bilateral contract, okay? Okay, this is a quote from I believe, Supreme Court case. We'll get to the bottom here and see. An agreement obtained by duress, coercion, or intimidation is invalid, since the party coerced is not exercising free will. If a person is ignorant of the contents of a written contract and signs it under mistaken belief, induced by misrepresentation, without negligence on his part, the agreement is void. What does negligence usually have to do with in a contract? Well, I'll tell you generally what it is. You don't read the contract. That's negligence. If you fail to read a contract, you have acted negligently, and you will not be able to void that contract based on that particular point. If you say, I didn't know what was in that contract, I just signed it, were you given opportunity to sign it and you didn't sign it? That's negligence. You will not be able to void that contract. Yes?
does that determine, I mean, why not 17, why not 19?
You could say it's arbitrary, the legislature decides that.
State thing,
Yeah, it's a legislative thing.
that what determines the legal battle.
Yeah, the question is why 18 years of age? Some states it's not 18, it may be 21. Legal age, for instance, to enter into marriage in some states is different. So, yeah, it's arbitrary in terms. You what? Well, it's constitutional from the standpoint that the Constitution gave domestic authority to the states themselves and through their constitutions. And if the Constitution of the state gave the legislature authority to set that arbitrary number, yes, it's constitutional from that standpoint. So, failure to read is negligence, okay? Read your contracts. Undue influence may prevent the formation of a binding contract. Undue influence may be a form of duress. That's taken from American Jurisprudence, which is a legal encyclopedia. It's pretty authoritative. It's very authoritative, okay? Okay. I don't know what happened. I did something there. Whenever parties are unequal and one possesses superior knowledge or overmastering influence, like somebody you see as an authority figure. It could be your principal, it could be your mother or father, or it could be the state. Some guy standing there in front of you, a judge or a sheriff or a clerk in the driver's license, they don't give legal advice, do they? But if they say, yeah, you have to do it, you figure, okay, he must know what he's talking about. That's from, anyways, and the other weakness, dependence, the presumption is that the transaction is invalid. So you enter in a contract, one has a superior standing for some reason, and the other is inferior to that, and he relies upon the other. That is considered an invalid contract. The strong party must show that no deception was practiced or undue influence used, and that everything was fair, open, voluntary, and well understood. Let me ask you this. If you're standing in court for a hearing, and the judge tells you, you don't have a right to do such and such, does that seem like undue influence? That you agree to what he's telling you? I would say that's probably true. I'm going to have you in contempt. I'm going to have the bailiff put handcuffs on you. I think that's undue influence. What's that? Yeah, yeah. So, voluntary assent or consent, a contract requires the intent to contract. So I brought that back up just to show that again. All these contracts that we've taken for granted our whole life and assumed that they were required by law. They're not. All of these contracts operate under civil law and not under common law. The marriage contract is a civil contract, three-way contract. The state is the senior party in the contract. And it is presumed that God has nothing to do with that relationship, that it is a secular contract. Just by the way, marriage licenses are, in the course of history, if measured against history, are so new, only since about 1930-ish. Some states adopted them at different time. And what happened, it was that very period from about 1920 to about 1945, America was moving out of common law jurisdiction and into civil law. And they did it with the passing of statutes. That's how they did it, by the use of statutes. So the lack of any of those elements we discussed renders a contract void or voidable. Okay? Void or voidable. And that is a proactive
that is a proactive action that you take. It is not a passive thing. You must assert. Under civil law, it is presumed that you consent unless you say no. It is presumed that you consent unless you make an express declaration that you defy that jurisdiction. Anybody have a question about that? That's really an important thing to understand. Under civil jurisdiction, it is presumed that you consent to the contract unless you make an express declaration reserving your rights and defying the contract. Yes?
Doing that with my marriage license right now. I got to pay for it.
Okay, it can be done. What you do is you move from civil law to common law. Common law marriage is not the same as what you've been told your whole life. Common law is a contract between two people, and it's a written contract if you wish, and probably a good idea. And you file it and record it with the recorder's office. When you record it with the recorder's office, it puts it in the public record, and it makes it official. It isn't just a state that can do this, okay? So, all right. Some examples of contracts we enter into, okay? Principle, you promise your rights whenever you sign a document. Anytime you sign a document, or if you're on the internet and you click on I agree, and you sign on it, you're entering into a contract. Make sure, how many of you, don't raise your hand, I don't want to embarrass anybody. How many of you have read through a contract that was on the internet from beginning to end? All right, good. We got a few that have done it. Good for you. You need to. I'm telling you, don't take it for granted. Now, if they've got an adhesion contract on there, you know what you do? Within 72 hours, you can send them a letter qualifying your agreement to the contract. You can fix the problem if you know how, okay? And if you are willing to, okay? So, clicking on the button, I accept, I agree, so that includes signatures. Now, real quick, in 1992, I bought a piece of ground, and I wanted to build a house, and somebody said to me, well, you have to get a building permit, and I thought, really? So I wasn't terribly young. I was 37 or something like that, I guess, at the time. So I wasn't a kid. I feel like I was a kid now looking back. But at 37, we're supposed to know the law, right? And a guy said to me, he says, well, you got to get a building permit for that. And so I said, really? And I said, if I own the land, what do I need a building permit? So this is where I started studying law. I went to a guy that was pretty good at it. And he said, well, what you have to do is go study the statute where the statute says you have to have a building permit and study what it says. Now, I wouldn't necessarily do that today because I know better now that it's none of their damn business. Okay? It isn't. But you have to secure your claim, and there's a way to do that. And that takes a little bit of time to do. I would do it differently today. Everything was fine with me, but here's what I did. My objectives at that time were to preserve my rights, to not waive my rights, and to have my application refused. Why did I want him to refuse my application? The law says, and it's called a maxim of law, M-A-X-I-M. A maxim of law is a self-evident truth that you don't have to prove, okay? It's like the Declaration says we're free and that we have certain unalienable rights, okay? So there's certain things I don't have to prove. The court can simply say, oh yeah, that's right. We recognize that as being true. So anyways, the maxim of law goes that an offer made and refused is a debt paid. Does that make sense? I owe you $20. I owe you a silver dollar. Let's talk about real money. Right? Real money. I owe you a silver dollar, and I offer to give you back that silver dollar, and you refuse it, saying, no, I want to collect on you for such and such. I want to keep you in my debt. The law says an offer to pay a debt, and that offer is refused, is a debt paid. Just need a document, put it in an affidavit, record it in the courthouse, in the records. So, anyways, that's what I really wanted them to do. I wanted them to refuse my offer. So I went and found the statute. Now, you want to learn to read the statutes. That's important. Doesn't mean they always apply to you. In fact, they usually do not. They do not, okay? But in that case, I was learning, and I was learning new things. So I went and got a building permit, and for the house I was going to build, and it's a form of government licensing. It's claiming I don't have a right, and therefore I need to get a privilege, permission from the state to do something. So I went and got a copy of the permit, and on the bottom of the permit, it's 67 Idaho Code 6511. I think that's it. The number here doesn't really matter. Don't worry about the number. It could be something I made up. I don't remember now. I think it is in 67. But anyways, it said I had to have a building permit. And the statute in Idaho Code was pretty broad, and it didn't have many requirements. It said that I had to give my name, I had to say where I was building, and I had to do a sketch that kind of gave them an understanding of what I intended to build. That was all it required. So I went and got the building permit, though, and on the building permit, it had a whole page of terms binding me to regulations of the state. Now, that's what it had on the permit, but that's not what it said in the statute. And we talked about this, some of you have heard this before, that if something goes beyond the scope of the statute in the regulations, if the regulations go beyond the scope of the statute, they're extra legal. They're not enforceable. Okay? So I went and got it, and I went and read the statute on it. I studied the statute, and I found that all of these terms on this page were extra legal. All of them were outside the scope of the statute. So what did I do? I took my red pen, and I ran lines all the way through those paragraphs that itemized other requirements of the permit. And I thought, oh boy, here we go. I've got the right answer. And I took in the permit, and I handed it to the clerk. I signed my name, and she said, that'll be $100, please. I completely changed the terms of the permit, didn't I? What was the state interested in? My money. So, I did preserve my rights because I didn't enter into the contract, did I? They had this special contract. It was an adhesion contract, and the state's the big guy saying, you got to follow my rules. It wasn't a fair agreement, but I stood my ground, and I preserved my rights. Again, that offer to pay is called a good faith offer. That's a good faith offer. I made the good faith offer. Okay, so moving on. Governing principles when dealing with the state. A state agent, meaning a public official, their actions cannot exceed the agency's authorized powers, rules, or regulations. And following that, agency rules and regulations, like the building permit, cannot exceed statutory limitations. In other words, if a police officer out on the street says, I'm walking down the street. Let's suppose I'm not even traveling in a car, but I'm walking down the street, and I'm carrying, I have a gun, an arm, ARM. That's not FIREARM, that's arm, ARM. The Second Amendment doesn't talk about firearms, it talks about arms. You think they're the same thing, and I'm telling you they're not. And when you use the word firearm, you're entering into the jurisdiction of the federal government under Title 26, under the ATF regulations. When you use the word firearm, you have surrendered your constitutional protections in exchange for statutory privileges and immunities. So, agency rules and regulations cannot exceed statutory limitations. So when the county wrote up that adhesion contract on my building permit and it exceeded what the authority was that was granted by the statute, everything that went beyond the scope of the statute, I could ignore with impunity. And that's what the law says. And there are many,
many U.S. Supreme Court cases that say that. Finally, statutory authority and powers cannot exceed constitutional limitations. So, if the Idaho Constitution provides that the legislature can impose concealed carry regulations, and it does, and if they violate the Second Amendment of the federal Constitution, it's unconstitutional. You get that? If the Idaho Constitution violates your federal protections, those provisions that go beyond the protections of the federal Constitution are unlawful and unenforceable. Any questions on that? That's a big deal. So when you read the Idaho Constitution and you say, hold it, that goes outside of what the federal Constitution provides for, you're probably right. And that's where people go to the Supreme Court and challenge those kinds of things. That's what the Constitution is about, okay? So, all right. Public officials must perform their duties which are non-discretionary. So if there's something in the statute, again, statutes regulate officers. And if they are required by law to do a certain thing or not to do a certain thing, your protection is, first of all, you protect yourself under the Constitution and you file suit against them under the statute. Does that make sense? Statutes are for controlling public officials. Constitutions are for protecting the people. All right. So, let's suppose that you go in an emergency to the emergency room. You need to have a strategy because they're government licensed. I have negotiated emergency room visits 4 or 5 times. I don't go there a lot. I don't go to the doctor much at all, quite frankly. But when I go as an emergency, I go to the emergency room, you're under duress. You probably are not thinking clearly. I mean, I can go through that whole list of competency, can I? And all those things, they're the ones providing the service. I'm the one in need. I'm begging at their door. Now, they are licensed, okay? So, they hand you a form and they say, please sign this accepting financial responsibility. And in all those cases, I've done something like this. Instead of signing their adhesion contract, or I take their adhesion contract and I treat it just like I did that building permit. I strike everything in there I don't agree with. Now, the clerk at the window, they're no lawyer, and if they are a lawyer, they know I have a right to change it. But they're not, and sometimes they object and sometimes they don't. But in this case, I wrote out one, and I just read a couple of things. I reserve the right to negotiate all fees, prices for the services and products billed for under this visit. We demand an itemized billing for the following: personnel, physicians, because you get done with an ER room visit and you get 3 different bills from 3 different places, right? Anybody that's done that knows how that is. So I want an itemized billing for the following: personnel, physicians, contractors, employees, products and services. I expressly forbid release of the information to other parties or persons unless named by us. In other words, I'm imposing a HIPAA restriction on them. You're not going to give this information to anybody without my permission. This is called a reservation of rights. Reserve the right to exclude any unwarranted items expense in our own discretion. My sole discretion. This page incorporated as part of the agreement between Madison and us. Notwithstanding anything to the contrary contained in Madison's documentation agreement, this page shall govern any controversy. Does that sound like a reservation of rights? You can do this. I'm telling you, you can do this. I've done it many times. In fact, one of the times I did it, we were there with our newborn baby, emergency. We had great insurance at the time, but I know that if they know you've got insurance, they're going to run all these damn tests on them they don't need. So I didn't tell them that, right? I didn't tell them. And I reserved my rights on the adhesion contract, and when we were done, the bill wasn't bad, and I filed for insurance and they paid for it. No big deal. That was a long time ago. So, do not sign the hospital's financial agreement form, okay? But the patient, for example, the patient should never sign the agreement. Why? They're under duress, they lack capacity. No question about it. There's no legally binding deal. But if they sign it and they fail to make a reservation of rights or to rescind the contract in a reasonable time, the contract will stand. Do you follow that? If you sign it lacking capacity, and you later have capacity, and while you're in a clear mind, you fail to go back and rescind or exercise rescission on your signature, it will stand. Okay, you have to do it in a timely manner. The spouse is not the treated party. They cannot force the spouse to sign for your treatment. You're an adult, right? 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 Now you're questioning that. I walk in with my wife. She's the one under duress. She needs to see the doctor. Can they make me sign the admission form? The answer to that is an absolute no. Now, you have the right to negotiate, demand for itemization, release of information prohibited. You reserve your rights. And I made a statement that anything to the contrary, this page governs. Okay? Those are kind of boilerplate kind of things that you say in a contract. And they're good things for you to read. When you read contracts, you'll see that. Okay? And finally, if you do sign by mistake, you can revoke the signature and rescind the agreement, but you must do so within a short period of time, usually 72 hours, business days. Okay? Send your letter ASAP following the event by certified return receipt mail. Okay? The state is licensed, so the state is operating under privilege to conduct business. They're licensed. Okay? Now, I was mistaken. I made a comment once that they can't refuse you. Technically, they can refuse you, but they can't do it for discrimination. They can refuse business, but if there's any inkling that they're doing it under discrimination, they've got a problem. So, emergency room visits, let's see, inherently involve duress. Duress impairs legal capacity. Patient lacks capacity. Person who accompanies him that cannot be forced to sign, and the contract signed under duress is voidable. So, revoke the signature, rescind the contract, or this thing hooks on. This word is called latches. Latches is the legal term that means you waive your right to rescind. That's what that means. So a kid that signs for a car, buys a car at age, say, 17, and he wants to terminate it when he becomes of legal age. You can do that. He turns 18. He can't wait till he's 19 to rescind the contract. He has to do it within a reasonable period. And the legal bar to him being able to do that is called latches. That's what that term means. So, once the contract is voided, there is no contract. No contract renders the fees of the hospital actually voidable or negotiable. Do I want to pay the hospital? Of course I do. They did me a great service. I have no objection to that. What I object to is for being in the hospital for 2 hours, sitting on a bed, no emergency, in terms of them having to do all these special things, and I get a bill for $3,000. That I have an objection to. There's no negotiation there. That's the problem. Okay? So, we already talked about discrimination is prohibited in an emergency room. Okay? Now, let's go to another adhesion contract. This at the bottom with the blue boxes on it is called an SS5 form. That's the form that you fill out when you apply for a Social Security number. Why do I have the form in the top of that has the red ribbon on it? I sent a FOIA
inquiry to the Social Security Administration, and I requested that they provide me with a certified copy of my SS5 form, which is that one at the bottom. And if you fold up that page that has the seal on it, the next page will be a certified copy of my SS5 form. That is legally admissible evidence that will show that when I entered into a Social Security agreement, I was only 15 years of age. Did you hear what I said? It is the evidence that I can walk into a court of law and say, here is legally admissible evidence that I entered into this contract as a minor. I want to terminate this agreement. That's what that is. And that's the process, and you can do it with any of your contracts with the state. You can send a FOIA request, documentation of any of the contracts. You have to know the words to how to do this, but you can learn. You learn the words to describe the contracts that you've entered into. And then, if you need certified copies so you can show it as evidence, then you may have to pay them. This one was actually expensive because this was, 1969? I don't know how far they had to dig back in their archives to find that sucker. But I think it cost me like $65 to get that. It wasn't, it wasn't cheap, but was it worth it? To me it was. Okay. So, all right.
Question.
Yeah.
My social security number says not for identification.
Good.
Now the new ones
Don't say that.
don't say that.
No.
So how do you fix?
That's another discussion. We can talk about that. That's a very good question. Yours, you have the evidence in your wallet. Yeah, you have the evidence in your hand. Don't lose it. I lost mine a long time ago thinking, well, I don't need this anymore. I didn't know at the time I needed it as evidence. So, good point. Okay, so the Social Security number is a franchise. It is a privilege that is granted to you by the federal government. And what the privilege is you're protected from cradle to grave in exchange for your wealth from cradle to grave. All right, so here's the principle. It isn't a law if it requires your signature. It isn't a law if it requires your signature. Have you ever been stopped by an officer and he handed you a traffic ticket? Did you sign it? Probably. Okay. Again, he's there. He's packing a 9mm, and he looks pretty tough, and he's often grumpy. Not always. Sometimes. Okay. So, if it requires your signature, now we're going to talk about that signature. Many times you're going to be asked for your signature, and you feel like you are compelled to sign. Okay. So it must be something else if it requires your signature. It means it must not be a law. If it requires your signature, it's not a law. It's a contract. The Constitution contains the government and protects us from them. Contracts is what we do amongst ourselves, and when government comes out of its sphere and operates as a business, it engages in commerce, and it requires us to sign contracts with it. It is a corporation, that's true. State of Idaho, capital S, state of Idaho, or all caps, is corporation. Idaho, if you did lowercase s, state of Idaho, or you said Idaho state, lowercase s, that's the republic. Tricky, huh? They are tricky. I'm telling you, they are tricky. So, it must be something else. It's a privilege and it's hidden in plain sight. So, licensing can be called a license, franchise, excise, grant, permit. All those different terms are forms of licensing. A special right, a license is a special right or privilege to do what is otherwise unlawful. Okay. So let's talk about how do we challenge a bad contract, void and voidable. A void or voidable contracts, an agreement is invalid, void, because the minds of the parties did not meet as to some of the essential terms. Again, that's from American jurisprudence. Now, it's important to understand that when we enter even into a bad contract, if we've taken benefit from the other party, we may have to make restitution. We may have to make restitution to that party. So if I bought a car as a 16-year-old and did it under contract, and when I turned 18, I wanted to rescind the contract, can I keep the car? No, can't. You have to return it. Common methods which government uses to induce unintentional consent to government contracts. Non-disclosure of the nature of the agreement. Okay? Non-disclosure. Misapplication of the law. This is a big one, guys, I'm telling you. When Governor Little, I have to confess, I don't think Governor Little actually imposed masking and vaccine on Idaho citizens. What he did do was stood silent when the Department of Health did, and when the media promoted that concept. In my reading of the executive orders, I don't see where he actually did that. Do I think he did some things wrong? Absolutely. He stood moot when he should have been talking and speaking out against what was being done by the health department. That was his duty, and he failed in it. So, when people were being told and businesses were being told that they had to deny people access to their businesses without a mask, that is called a misapplication of law. Did he have, and did the health department have the right to do it in their own offices? I think so. I think they had the right to do it in their own offices. Did they have the right to do it to people who were coming into their offices? No, I don't think so. Okay? But they absolutely did not have the right to tell natural grocers or Costco or any business that they had to close their doors because of COVID. That was overreach of government, and they don't have the right to do that. And that's called misapplication of law, that they made some declaration, and then the media spread that misapplication, and people thought that it applied to them, and it didn't. That's called misapplication of law. He should have. If you read the statute, the question was, does the Attorney General, should he have stopped that? And the answer to that is, if you go read the statute that defines the authority of the Attorney General, it states in there, it doesn't say much about it, and it says that his job is to, in fact, defend the officers of the state, but it also says that he has a public obligation as well. It does say that. I don't remember the exact terms of what it said, but yeah, he could have done that and should have done that. Yeah.
Dennis, my understanding on that is where he mandated that as the government.
Yeah.
It applied to federal employees only because they work for him. You're federal employee.
Well, that's true, and state employees too. If you read the actual statute, it actually said that he had the authority to marshal the assets and resources of the state of Idaho in the cause of containing whatever the threat is that the state was experiencing. It does say that he has the authority to marshal the assets, the employees and resources of the state, and including the Idaho National Guard. It includes that as well. And it did that under the what's the word where we take up our own arms in defense of our country, not as a militia. It's under the militia provisions of the Idaho Constitution and under the statute pursuant to that. It's where it says that. So it was kind of bizarre, all of it that happened. Anyway, they use undue influence. We've talked about that. False representations as to what law is. When they stand there and they say, yep, this is the law, you have to have this driver's license, that's a misrepresentation. Okay? Use of ambiguous legal terms, like the term United States. How could that be ambiguous? It is. There are court cases that say there are 3 different United States. There are 3 different United States. One of them, and notably the one that we don't recognize, is the government is a corporation, and it is called the United States. Erroneous presumption of law and indoctrination, not education. Okay? Any of these issues, individually or collectively, may constitute fraud or what we call constructive fraud. In other words, it may be that this guy that actually had me sign for the Social Security number didn't defraud me, but the collective action of an attorney or of an accountant, his accountant who told him that was the law. And they talked to the state taxing authority and they said, yeah, that's the law. And they heard it on the nightly news. Yeah, that's the law. That's constructive fraud. That it acted to defraud me of a right, even though it maybe wasn't intentional, but collectively or individually, it perpetrated a fraud. Okay? That's called constructive fraud. Okay? Fraud, how to prevent and cause and cure. Fraud gives us a critical tool to attack contracts entered into by unlawful inducement. This is the statute of frauds. The statute of frauds is a weapon of defense and does not presume a contract to be valid just by reason of the signature, if it is not signed according to the real intentions of the party. So they walk into court and they say, well, it's got your signature on it. And your comment is, well, did you read it? Yeah, I read it. Is that your signature? Yeah, but I read it, but that isn't what I intended the result of this contract to be. Do you know that if the contract isn't what you intended to be and doesn't reflect your intentions, it's a voidable contract. It can be defeated. So if fraud is intentionally misstating facts for the purpose of inducing another in reliance of the lie to part with his property or with a right. Okay, now, I talked earlier about if you sign an adhesion contract, how do you fix that problem? We talked about that after you leave, you have 72 hours to rescind your signature, right? Okay. There's another way to do it when you actually sign the contract, and when I filled out my passport application today, this is what I did. This is what it looks like. John Doe, and over the top of your name, you can write any of those things, and they all mean the same thing. UCC 1-308 is the Uniform Commercial Code, and it has special provisions. Do you know America operates under the Uniform Commercial Code? America operates in commerce, and all of the laws have been drafted to create smooth, easy commerce. And in doing so, it has violated our rights. It has abandoned the common law. It has abandoned the common law for money. Because more commerce means more tax revenue. Right? It does. So, when you sign your name, you have to know what this means. Or if the judge says, what does this mean? And you say, I don't know. Then it doesn't do you any good. You have to know what it means. So, probably the easiest one to remember is on the right there that says reserving all rights.
or reserving all rights, waiving none. Those ones make sense, right? What this is a provision in the Uniform Commercial Code that says when you sign a contract, and it's an adhesion contract, you have a right because there is no two-way negotiating in these contracts, right? All of these adhesion contracts are just forms, and everybody gets the same form, and you don't have any opportunity to negotiate the terms of that contract. You have a common law right to negotiate terms. There's no meeting of the minds. How you reserve your right is this provision, and you don't have to say UCC 1-307. It used to be a little different than that. It used to be 1-207. 308, I'm sorry. 308. So what you're doing is you are invoking a common law right against the adhesion contract, explicitly stating that you reserve your common law rights against some of the terms of the contract. And it's allowed. They put it in the UCC because they're required by the common law to do so. Do you know the common law rules? Idaho is a common law state. The courts of Idaho follow the common law rule. You just have to know what they are and how they work. So when I signed that contract with the ER room, this is what I wrote on the bottom of my signature. And when I made my passport application, this is what I wrote on the bottom of the application over my name. Okay? There's some other things that I've heard that I think are valid. They're kind of new concepts to me. One of those is before your name, if you put the name, the word by, B-Y. How many of you have been involved in corporate contracts where you had to sign your name, and on that signature line it says by, colon, and then you sign your name? What that is saying is that you're signing for the company you work for. Maybe it was the INL, or maybe it was a corporation, your own private corporation, because you're incorporated. So when you're signing that, the by means that you're signing as an individual and you are not making yourself a party personally to the contract. Does that make sense? That you're signing as the president of the company, but not as the guy that owns the stock of the company, but as the guy that runs the company. Do you understand the difference between that? If you're an officer of a company, a corporation, and when you act as the officer of the corporation, that's different than you, the man who goes home at night to his family or goes to lunch. There's a difference. There's a different status. Yeah, that would be accurate. It's called your autograph, not a signature. Okay.
Still stands up a lot higher than
So all of those things there work. In fact, when I go someplace and I use my debit card to pay for gas or something, and they have the digital signature there, do you know what I put there? I don't put my name on it. I put non-assumpsit. I just put non-assumpsit. That's Latin, which means I do not enter into contract with you. That's what it means. That I am not consenting to this contract. I am reserving my rights. They never look at those signatures. Do I pay them? Absolutely. Do I pay them? I do. Yeah.
With, like I just went into business, and she said, well, I'm just signing yourself. Well, she's the owner. I'm not her owner. It's my contract with her. So I write as per Stephanie, or as per. Absolutely.
If she gives you permission, that is legal. It is lawful. It is lawful for you with their authority. It's called power of attorney. They're granting you power of attorney to do that. That's what they're doing. Okay, so protect your rights, protect your property, stay out of court, stay out of jail. Okay. All right. The Idaho Declaration of Rights. What number are we on? 41 here. No state shall pass any law impairing the obligation of contracts. That's a constitutional protection. And you can rely on that and the principles of contract to protect yourself. You have a right to. All right.
let's see here. And I mentioned this earlier, government cannot convert a right into a privilege in order to regulate it, to tax it. A state may not impose a charge for the enjoyment of a right by the federal Constitution. That's in a case, Murdoch versus Pennsylvania, 1943. You can surrender a right, but only knowingly and with intent. Waivers of constitutional rights not only must be voluntary, but must be knowing, intelligent acts done with sufficient awareness of the relevant circumstances and the likely consequences. That sounds like intent, doesn't it? Okay. All right. We're going to go through this real quick here. Now, what I'm going to tell you, if you skip down here, we talked about quite a few of these, but we talked about recognizing your rights, identifying the event that occurred that created the problem for you, and then you want to document and describe the event, why it was a violation, and then you prepare documentation to correct the problem. So this is just an introduction. I really encourage you to go look up some of these resources that I've got on this resource sheet. Okay, there's some great material there, and I'm always learning new things, and you will be too. Now, America operates in commerce, and when you raise a objection, when you rebut a presumption that you are subject to jurisdiction or that you've entered into a contract, you're just doing business, just like them. You have to go back and with documentation, with paper, and say, I think you violated my rights here, and put it in their face, and then they have to rebut what you said. It's just like playing tennis, you know. They hit the ball to you, you hit it back. And you go until somebody stops, and whoever stops loses. Okay? So it takes some determination, it takes some willpower, and it takes understanding the law and understanding contracts. And you can do this. Now, I'm going to skip some of this stuff. Yeah.
Paid by people, it takes 6 weeks to get paid, and I said, my contract said at the bottom, pay to do a completion of work,
Yeah.
and they have to pay me then, if they do.
Yeah.
Do they have to pay me then because they signed a paper with that clause on there?
Well, you can refuse service. The question is, people that are delinquent on paying people do so, they do it habitually, and they make it it's their mode of operation. Except that people who do that to you are in the habit of abusing other people's rights and property. And so some of those people, you could simply say, you can pay me in advance, or at least give me a deposit in advance or something. Yeah, probably change the contract and post a policy. I don't know what the business is, but many businesses now have a deal that says payment due in advance before services. So, yeah, that's a good question. Okay, always challenge jurisdiction. The young man that I was in court with claimed that the court didn't have jurisdiction over him, and I believe that they don't. I believe he's right. But the problem is he has created a presumption of jurisdiction through all of these applications that he's filled out with the state. It's hard to argue that unless you do some homework and you make changes in your what is called status. Status refers to the way that the state views you as a person, as a ward. They view you as a ward because everything you filled out suggests that you are. And then, so I might just say, that's a little off. Sorry. And
Go back to talking about statute versus law.
yeah,
So in Idaho, speeding rules are statute.
they are statute. Now, the common law requires me to conduct my affairs in such a way that I don't hurt my neighbor. Right? We can all agree on that. It is reasonable to also expect that because the population, everybody but me on the road, believes that we have to travel at 40 miles an hour in a 40 mile an hour zone, but they don't. They travel at 47. So it is reasonable to understand that as a matter of common law, the custom is that they think everybody should reasonably respect that speed limit. Because that's the custom, it's appropriate for you to at least observe it in the same way they do. So that they can reasonably anticipate how you're going to act on the road so that they protect themselves. So while I could be going down the road 100 miles an hour out on that Mud Lake flat going north to Salmon, and there's not another soul on that road, and a cop pulls me over and says he wants to ticket me, that's an unreasonable citation because nobody is there put at risk, and my conduct doesn't affect the way they're going to defend themselves in any way. And that I would defend and could defend and would win. Because I don't have a contract with the state. So that's the license. And when you register your car, it no longer is a car per se, it becomes a motor vehicle because it's now entered into the jurisdiction of the state through a compromised title. You have surrendered absolute title, and the state now has equitable title in your car, and you are under contract, and that vehicle, because it's now a motor vehicle instead of private property, is regulated by the state and requires that it only be operated by somebody carrying a driver's license. So you can enter into that from either direction. But if you look at my car, it doesn't have a state license plate on it. Okay? And there's different ways to approach that problem. There's different ways to approach that problem. So, all right. So, here's the ticket. Now, whenever you're dealing with the government, you're working with some kind of an adhesion form. In this case, this is a traffic citation. And if you look down on the demand that your adversary identify the law upon which they allege your duty is based. So, in this particular case, if you look hard on the right, the statute section is referenced on the document. When you get a notice from the state, look at what the statute is they're relying upon in giving you the citation. When you get a property tax from, and this is the fun one, I've learned some wonderful things about that in the last few weeks. Wonderful things. But when you get a property tax bill from the county, look at what the statute is they rely upon for their authority and go read it. It's really fun reading. It's exciting reading. My poor wife, oh, I found something. And she's going to sleep while I'm trying to tell her about it. You know, she's a good audience and really good support on all this. But anyways, so this one says 49, 40, 456, 2, and 49, 401 something. I can't tell. Go look up the statute. When those executive orders came out from Governor Little, how many in this room went and looked at the executive orders? Good. Because I couldn't find anywhere where he actually mandated those things. It was the health department, 7th District Health Department, and it was the media that promoted that fraud. And why did they do it? Because they were getting money from FEMA and from ARPA. I wish I could say it wasn't true, but they got some from Trump. Okay? I think, I don't have an explanation on that. I think he was between a rock and a hard spot. I think the American people were so in fear that they would do anything. And I think politically that was a difficult position to be in. I don't know any other explanation for that. Maybe he just simply had bad advice at that time. Anyways, so locate the Idaho Code reference or the federal regulation on the document which you've received, On a traffic citation, you'll find the title and section and the brief description of, oh, this is kind of fun. Let's suppose that you get stopped for running a red light, and he writes that down on the citation, but when he writes down the citation number, he writes down the wrong citation number. Guess what happens when you go to court? You'll win because he cited the wrong code violation. I mean, technical things you can win on, but you don't need to win on technical violations. You can win on the law. Straightforward. Okay. Let's see. So, for Title 49, you go to the Idaho Code. Go to Google, go to the search bar, and Google Idaho Code, and it'll bring it up. And if you want to look at the traffic, motor vehicles, just put in Idaho Code motor vehicles or traffic or driver's license, and it'll bring up what you're looking for. But you might, once you find it, pin the Idaho Code to your taskbar across the top so it's easy to go to. And this is what it actually says in the code. All right, guys, I think we're probably there. Any questions? Yeah.
Did you see everybody got their big increase in their property values? And my neighbor ran right down a huge line, and she had a bit hundreds reduced by it. So, what are legal, there's no improvements on it.
What? I agree with you. What you're talking about is you're assuming that you're liable for the tax.
Yeah.
Well, that's what we've been told. I was introduced to the concept of land patents 30 years ago. And I actually, on a piece of property that I lived on and owned, acquired a copy of the original land patent that was issued to the original settler who settled the land where we lived. It's called a land patent. It's a grant. A land patent and a land grant are exactly the same thing. It's called a grant or a patent. And what it is a unassailable title to the land. Unassailable means to anybody and for any reason. What happened was back in, I don't know when exactly, the description of your land, like the term citizen of the United States, was prostituted by the state and moved into commerce. It was taken out of common law property ownership and moved into commerce for the purpose of generating taxes for the state, that when a sale is made, they attach some kind of equity interest to the state. And the way they've done that is by abandoning the meets and bounds descriptions of the land and giving it a parcel number. It's the parcel number that creates the relationship between it and the state. Now, there's a guy by the name of Ron Gibson, and I just attended a seminar with the guy. I've been interested in this topic forever because I believe it's the greatest violation of constitutional property rights that there is. It was never intended. In fact, in the original passages of the Homestead Act, it said in there that the purpose behind it was to secure the land to the settler against abuse by speculators was the concept. And this is an interesting thing to find out about Alexander Hamilton, who was very involved in the passage of the Constitution. But following the passage and after the war, he was a speculator that was investing and trying to, with some others, to land grab the land grants that were given to the soldiers who fought in the Revolutionary War. And it was a real, what's the word? It was tragic, but Alexander Hamilton is alleged to have been involved in that. And he wanted also, by the way,
I like Alexander Hamilton, but there's some things about him I don't like. He was very in favor of a central bank. He was one of the big promoters of the central bank, but it shows that he was really driven by self-interest, and we all are driven by self-interest, but not at the expense of somebody else. And he was involved in the scheme to buy up the land patents that were owned by the soldiers who had fought in the Revolution. So why did I tell you that story? Yeah, property tax. The property tax, when the Homestead Acts were passed that granted the land to Idaho and other states, it was specifically stated in the Homestead Act that it was to secure the land to the settlers and to their heirs forever. And yet we have a property tax that jeopardizes that grant provision. So if you want to learn about that, check out Ron Gibson. He's got a great book on land patents. And that's something I am pursuing myself, and I intend to file a land patent claim myself on my own property. You got to know what you're doing. You want to do it carefully. And do I believe it's lawful? I do. I believe it is valid. I believed it all along. I just didn't know the methodology for doing it. Okay, I'm all done. Thanks, guys.
Thank you, Ben, very much. All right, everybody, thank you. Appreciate you coming. We'll have Dennis back again. He's not done, obviously. He's just a wealth of knowledge, and he's really excited about doing all this for us. So thank you so much. And again, if anybody wants to help with the parade, that would be greatly appreciated. The Liberty Dinner, I think it'll be a great event for us. You know, seeing Ron, I know Ron will be a good speaker for us. So with that, come next week, it'll be Scott Cleveland will be here and running for U.S. Senate. So we definitely need to ask him the tough questions. Thank you all. Take care.